Assalamu alaikum everyone, I am Muhammad Anas and I am currently an MPhil student at the Department of Plant Sciences, Qaid Azmi University, Islamabad, Pakistan. Do you know that by 2050, more than 10 million people could die each year due to the diseases that have grown resistance to the drugs? Yes, but to understand that we first need to know what microorganisms are what these diseases are. So microorganisms, these are the tiny organisms that include bacteria, viruses, fungi, and these could not be seen through the naked eyes. These could only be seen through the microscope. So these microorganisms, these are present all around us. We live in a sea of bacteria. These live outside our body in the environment everywhere, and these live inside our body. In fact, there are more bacteria in our body as compared to the living human cells. So when we talk about these bacteria, these microbes, these are very useful and these play a very beneficial role, a very useful role in our bodies. For example, in boosting our immune system, in helping us digest the food, and in keeping the children healthy and production of vitamin K. And besides this, there are many useful aspects of these bacteria. But beside this, there are less than 1% of bacteria which can also infect humans, and these can also cause illness in the humans, and these bacteria then become the pathogens. And beside this, different microbes act as pathogen inside the human body and causes the illness and diseases. And it is said that where there is illness, there is medication. And there is the need of medication. So obviously the need of medication in this particular case would be the antimicrobial therapies or antimicrobial drugs which we are talking about. So antimicrobial drugs, and specifically in case of bacteria, the antimicrobial drug is antibiotics. The antibiotics, these tend to kill the bacteria or slow down their growth or attack them. So when we talk about the antibiotics, we should know that antibiotics, these are the drugs that could attack the certain bacteria, that could attack the bacteria and kill the bacteria, but these doesn't harm the human cells. Okay, so here's the thing that there are more than 100 unique type of antibiotics present, but these antibiotics, these doesn't cure the flu or cold or things like that, because these antibiotics are certainly and particularly these are used against the bacterial diseases. So as we know that antibiotics, these are more than 100 unique classes of antibiotics are present. So each and every class have their own way of working, or own way of mechanism, or own way of killing or inhibiting the bacteria. So here's the thing, that some of the antibiotics, these attack the bacterial cell wall. Obviously the human cells doesn't contain the cell wall, and the bacterial cell wall is made of peptidoglycan. So these attack the bacterial cell wall and either degrade it or either break it down. So one of the examples of these is penicillin, which is the first ever antibiotic ever discovered by the Fleming. So the penicillin attack the peptidoglycan cell wall, and beside this, some of the antibiotics, these attack the bacterial ribosomes, which are structurally very different from the human ribosomes. And that is where the thing is that these antibiotics, these tend to attack that ribosome, and these tend to destroy that ribosome, inhibiting the effect of inhibiting the disease caused by that bacteria. And this is a very good point and very positive point, but here's a problem is that there's a drawback, obviously the drawback, which in this case is that these antibiotics, these doesn't distinguish between the harmful and the harmless, which is a beneficial bacteria, because the problem is that these antibiotics, these also kill the beneficial bacteria as well. Now this is alarming, obviously, because I've already mentioned that the bacteria have some very positive roles in our bodies, and we need those bacteria. But when it comes to the fact that the antibiotics have a drawback and these attack the beneficial bacteria as well, so then what remains behind are those bacteria which have the resistance against antibiotics in their cells. So the bacteria which are resistant to antibiotics, these are not killed by antibiotics, and that's what we call antibiotic resistance. Or when we talk that about the microbes, so we call that the antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. Now antimicrobial resistance, this is now a global threat. And because then there is a fact that how does the antimicrobial resistance spread? How does it spread? Now, if we go through points, the first one is that these antimicrobial resistance, the antimicrobial resistant bacteria or microbes which are left behind after we take the antibiotics, these spread obviously, and these thrive and these amplify, and when these spread, these multiply, and these obviously are spread throughout the body and throughout the environment or throughout the biota, whatever we call it. But that's a problem, because when antimicrobial resistant microbes are spread, then we would have very fewer and limited options to medicate these and to get rid of this. The second problem is that these can also trigger the antimicrobial resistance in other bacteria through the genetic recombination, because there are certain plasmids in bacteria which are resistant to antimicrobials. These are antimicrobial resistant plasmids, and when the genes that are resistant to the antibiotics or to the antimicrobials, these genes, when these are transferred from one microorganism to another microorganism, the problem that arises is that the other microorganism, the other microbe, these also develop the resistance against certain antibiotics and certain drugs. Now the drugs which we take are for our own advantage and for getting rid from different infections, and when these microbes develop the resistance against these drugs, that would be a problem, that would be a dilemma, and the situation can get pretty much convoluted. Now the third problem is that when the diseases are spread, obviously with the spread of diseases, the problem is that the resistant microbes, these are transferred from one person to another, and this could also spread the antimicrobial resistant microbes throughout the environment. So antimicrobial resistance is now a global threat. As I mentioned in the inception, that by 2050 more than 10 million people could die each year due to this problem. Now the thing is that large number of bacteria are no longer killed by the antibiotics which we used to take some years before, and that's a big dilemma. Now there are some causes of antimicrobial resistance, and one of those causes is the factory farming, obviously the livestock factory farming, because they use a lot of antibiotics for the animals when these get infectious and when these get ill. And now the problem is that when a lot of antibiotics are used in factory farming, these develop a lot of resistance, and that's a problem. Another problem is the overuse of antibiotics in our homes and in our daily lives. Obviously that's a very big problem, because when we use antibiotics in everything like hand sanitizer, in soaps, and in different cleaning products, that would make a problem for I think the little children, because the little children have a very good immune system. And what do you think we have the immune system for? Because obviously immune system need germs to practice on, and when the children are not introduced to these rendered germs, these small germs around the floor and stuff, they would have problems when these are grown, when the children are grown. And it is recorded that they have problems of allergies in adulthood, and they have problem of different asthmas and stuff in their adulthood. So we should not have the overuse of antibiotics in our daily life. Inadequate diagnosis is one of the problems, one of the causes of antimicrobial resistance as well. Because inadequate diagnosis, whenever we go to the hospitals and whenever we go to the different doctors, and if they don't understand the disease, probably they just prescribe the antibiotics, and that's the problem. And another problem in this case is the agriculture use. Obviously, the different crops, when these are attacked by different microbes and different pathogens, most of the times the antimicrobial drugs are used without knowing the real causative agent, and that's the problem where the resistance is developed by that microbe. Now, when there's obviously the problem of that dilemma, that problem of antimicrobial resistance, which is a global threat, then we need different solutions, and one of the solutions is that we should take antibiotics only when these are prescribed by our doctors. Obviously, we usually tend to get the antibiotics each and every time when we have headache or when we have any problem. So we should only rely on our doctors to prescribe the antibiotics for us. And the next thing is that we should complete our treatments. We should not leave it incompleted, or we should not leave it in the path, because the incomplete treatment is more dangerous than no treatment at all, because the incomplete treatment triggers your microbes and then it doesn't finishes its job, and that's where the microbes produce the resistance against the antibiotics. Obviously, the next one of the biggest dilemma of our people is that they share their antibiotics with other people, their relatives and their friends, which we shouldn't do. We shouldn't share our antibiotics with our friends, our relatives, and our close people, our colleagues, because that would be a big disaster, obviously. And the next problem is that we should. The next solution is that we should acknowledge people about the use of antimicrobial drugs, obviously. And one of the biggest dilemma in my country, Pakistan, is that people have less knowledge of different kinds of infections, obviously. Some of the people use antibiotics for the cold and flu, and that's the problem, because we should know that antibiotics should only be used for the bacterial diseases, for the bacterial infections, because antibiotics are antibacterials, and then there are antiviral diseases which are used against the viruses, and then there are antifungal diseases which are used against the fungi. So when it comes to the farmers have a very heavy duty to perform, because farmers have different livestock, these have different animals. So first of all, these they should keep their place clean, and place should be cleaned of germs, and their animals would stay away from different diseases and introduction of pathogens. The second thing is that they should separate the sick animals from the healthy animals, and that would stop the propagation of disease. The next thing for farmers is that they should dry and store their food, because food is very important factor. The next is that the farmers should avoid the stress condition for their animals, because when their animals and their livestock and pets are in stress condition, they are more likely to get the disease. And last but not the least is very important that they should maintain the adequate amount of nutrition for the animals and their livestock, which is very necessary. So we should act on this, and we should stay away from the overuse of antibiotics, and we should stay safe and stay healthy. Take care.